So you might be thinking at this point, now that we've set up our Django app on our server, Django Tute, we've scripted the deployment, totally automated it. We've got database backups running on deploy. You might be thinking, aren't we done yet? Jesus Christ, how much more of this is left? And this is an optional video, so you can skip this if you want. But I think it's kind of important to learn how to automate your server setup. And I'm not talking about automating it using fancy tools like Ansible or anything like that. I'm just talking about using bash scripting, just having a script that sets up your server. Don't get me wrong, all those fancy tools are great, but I don't want to teach you anything too new. I just want to show you how, in principle, you can automate server setups. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It's so you don't get too attached to your servers. If you don't know how to automatically recreate your server, then you will become very attached to your servers. They will become like your pets. You will begin to love them. You will give them cute names. And if someone or something puts you in a position where you might need to delete your server, you'll go, oh God, no, not my server. And you'll become full of fear because you won't know how to get it working again if it gets deleted. And this puts you in a vulnerable position that you don't want to be in. You want to be able to just blow away your server and make a new one and not shed a single tear. The phrase that I've heard in system administration or DevOps is you want to treat your servers like cattle, not pets, which is a little macabre, but I think describes it nicely. So with that in mind, I'm going to create a brand new server and set it up. But instead of setting it up by typing in a bunch of commands, I'm going to script the setup. And this is going to be a longer video, but I'm going to try and edit it so that when we're waiting for setup commands to finish, you don't have to watch all that shit. Cool, so we're going to create a new server the same way we did before. If you recall, we did Ubuntu, standard, $5 a month, no block storage, whack it in New York, add my SSH key, Matt Tute, which we already had, one droplet, we're going to call it Django Cattle. Cool, create the droplet. So this will be costing me twice as much money per month every hour. I think they bill you by the hour, but I'll delete both of these after this tutorial is done, so it won't cost me any money. Okay, it is setting up my server, getting me an IP address. Cool, there's my IP address. Let's copy that to the clipboard and let's get going. So I'm going to add a script. I'm going to call it setup server. Oh, shit. That's going to be my IP address. Let us add in a hashbang, bin bash, city, kind of important, sets up new server to host Django app. And we want to set the server to be this IP address. Cool. Now, I've actually gone back and looked at all the instructions that I gave while doing this and sort of collated a list. And I've already kind of written the script. And one thing you can do when setting up a new server is two things. Instead of just doing it all manually, you can write a script to start and just write the script as you go. And you end up with a script that mostly works and mostly sets up your server and is a record of how you set it up. Alternatively, you can set it up manually and just sort of half write a script and start dumping commands into the script, but never running it. And then at the end, sort of fix it up a little bit, work out the bugs and get your script working. But I do recommend having a script like this that shows you how to set up your server. Even if it's something that never runs, even if it's just a reference that you copy the commands in and run, you want something that documents how to set up your server. Right, so with that, let's get started. We should have our SSH key on the server. If we don't, I'm screwed. But I'm just going to copy this into here so that I can run SSH root at $server. Yes. Cool, we're in Django Kettle. It's all working. That's a good thing to test first. The other thing we can do, because it's quick and I've got it on speed dial, is go into Notepad, run as administrator, and we can modify our host file so that we can give it a nice little nickname locally, just so we don't need to constantly type in this IP address. And we'll call this cattle server. Okay. Typically, you need to restart your bash shell to get the new settings. So code, Django deploy, ++++ to make it big, SSH root at cattle server. So say yes, and we are back into Django Cattle. Cool. So let's go through the commands that we did to set up the server. And $server. And we're going to run bin dash on the remote server, and we're going to run a here string to run all of these commands on the server. And we need to whack in a set E errors. So we want to describe what's happening as it's happening using this sort of log thing doing thing. So maybe let's start out by just being setting up server. Then at the end, we want to see that we're done setting up the server. Okay, so the stuff we're going to do, we're going to we'll be updating our apt sources, which is apt update. We'll be upgrading apt packages, which hopefully that grub thing doesn't come up and we have to figure out what to do there. Installing required files, installing apt packages. To install things like pip, we'll need to install virtualenv. We'll need to set up our project folder. The apt project folder, if you recall. We will need to start creating our virtual environment. Yep. And then we'll need to set those environment variables, setting global system. Right, we'll need to do all of those things, and that's it. That's all the things we'll do. So it doesn't seem like much when you just write it as a list. What seems like a huge task broken down into small chunks isn't so bad. Let's just convert these comments into printing. Okay. All right, updating apt sources. How did we do that? So we used apt update, if you recall. Now there are two things I want to change about this. One is to pass in a parameter or a flag at the start called QQ, which I think is like super quiet or something. It just means run it, but don't print anything. And so this means that we'll only see this while it's happening, and then when it's done, unless it has an error, it'll just quietly continue. And that's just so we don't pollute the screen with all of the output. The other thing is, instead of using apt, which is a nice command line tool for interactive terminal sessions, we're going to use apt-get, which has the same command line interface of all the commands you can do. It just, I think the way it's been explained to me is it just has a better terminal output for scripts. Perhaps it doesn't even matter if we have the QQ setting, but we're just going to use apt-get. And that's what I always do. I always just use apt-get for scripting and apt for when I'm typing, partially just because it's fewer letters. So we're going to update apt-get QQ upgrade. The nice thing about this is this will just update every time, and this will only upgrade what's required. And QQ will say yes to everything, I believe, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to test it out. Now I'm going to edit out the bit where I sit and wait for this to run, so you don't have to wait 15 minutes for this all to work, but let's give this a go. I think that's enough. I will comment these out so we know they're not running. Cool. Let's run our script and test it out. Scripts, what was it? Setup server. Okay, that took like 2 minutes. Let's see that even though we passed the quiet parameter to apt upgrade, maybe that did something, I don't know, but it basically updated the app sources, upgraded the packages, and then ran all of this stuff, which is cool. Didn't ask us to do anything, which was nice, so it sort of worked automatically. I think it all worked. It all looks like happy text, except for all the stuff saying the front end is not usable. It looks like it's set up all these packages for us, which is nice. Cool, that worked. Let's see what happens if we run it a second time. I think it should just skip all of this, and it does, which is cool. So it's not quite what we would call idempotent. It does do something slightly different every time we run it, but it is nice in that we can run it twice, and the second time around it does an error, and if there are no new updates and nothing new to upgrade, it just won't do anything, which is cool. It runs quite quickly. So let's get on to installing the apt packages that we want. So the packages that we have installed and used are apt, what is it, QQ install, install. So the big one was Python 3 pip. The other one was DOS to Unix, which, if you recall, we were using to clean up the line endings. And then something that we used from time to time, which was nice to have, was tree, which, if you recall, just prints a like a file system tree, which is cool. So let's run that. And this should take, I don't know, like 30 seconds or so. Cool, so that all seems to be working. Sweet. Okay, the next thing we want to do is use pip to install virtualenv. So while we're waiting for this to be done, because I think it will just finish soon, and install these packages for us, let's try using pip3 to install virtualenv. So we've just installed pip3, and now we can install virtualenv on the server, which we will need to set up our project. So we can run it again. Just going to go through all these steps again, but sort of skip over these ones. When it updates, I think it does have to make a bunch of web requests still just to check, but it gets through it pretty quickly, and it's installing virtualenv, and that seems to have worked okay. So that's good. We need to set up our project folder. So if you recall, we are assuming the presence of a folder called app, and we're also assuming that the logging directory is there, which is app logs, because this has to get created manually. And we're not copying it from the server, so we need to make it. If you want to be a bit sneaky, you can do it all in one line. They're making dir p app logs, so it'll create app and then logs. Personal preference, whatever you want, I don't care. So I'm pretty sure that'll work, so I'm just going to skip over that. So we want to create a virtual environment with virtualenv, which we have installed in the global Python 3 using pip3. We're going to create a virtual environment using our Python 3 executable, and we want to put it in app env which is where we've been having it this whole time. All right, so once again, I'm just going to run those two things because I'm pretty confident they'll work. And while that's chugging along in the background, we will get onto this, which is a bit more hairy. Setting our system environment variables. Oh, there we go. Oh, command not found. What did I fuck up there? All right, let's look at this. Setup server line 32. Jesus. What do we add? Make DP app logs. Let's just comment these out and see if that I can't think of what just went wrong. Seems to work. If we add our, if we do this, so this is like the most crude form of debugging where you've got no fucking idea what went wrong. So you just slowly comment things and uncomment them, and it's a pretty kind of dumb way to do it, but it also kind of works. Might just take a long time. That seems to work nicely. Is there anything wrong with this? One problem that we're going to have here, does it just stomp over the old virtual env? One thing I don't like is that I actually don't know how this behaves if the virtual env is already there. And so I'm going to show you something that we can do to allow us to run this script multiple times and only creating a virtual environment if we need one. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a test in here using bash's if syntax. So this is something I looked up earlier. I do not have this memorized because who the fuck remembers this shit? So this is saying if there is not a directory append, so if our virtual environment hasn't been created, then do something else, and finish with fee, which is just the if end of if statement thing, which is pretty random. So if there isn't a directory here, we want to create the directory. Else, let's print out skipping virtual and creation already present. Give yourself a nice message. Let's try that out. Cool. But it all seems to be working, which is nice. Skipping virtual app creation already present. And we might turn back to this later. This sort of logic of if this, then do that, otherwise do nothing. And this just makes our script easier to run over and over again, and we know it's not going to do something weird by trying to overwrite an existing virtual environment. Another thing we could do instead is to just remove whatever's there and recreate a new one, which is also a valid thing to do. Maybe better, in fact. All right, so now we get to the issue of setting our system environment variables. So there were two that we set. One was Django settings module. And if you recall, we set that to tut.settings.prod, and this was to tell our Django app to always use the production settings. The other one was Django secret key. And that needs to be something. So here's the thing. If we were to just hard code this secret key into this script, that would really be no better than hard coding it into our source code. So it sort of defeats the purpose of the secret key to put it in our script. So what we want to do is make the secret key a parameter of the script. instead, so that it's someone else's responsibility, like mine right now when running it, to pass the secret in. And so it does sort of end up with this sort of chain of dependencies of like, where does the secret key get stored? Do you just remember it? Do you make it up every time? What are you supposed to do? And that's a problem that is solved by tools like Ansible Vault, or I think HashiCorp Vault might also do this. There's a whole fucking can of worms with secret management. But right now, let's just say that you've written them down on a piece of paper, you've put them in some sort of database locker on your local computer, and you're happy just typing them in as arguments when you deploy the server. And there are sort of more advanced ways to manage secrets that you can look into later. But for now, we're just going to do this. So this isn't a secret. We can just hardcode this as a setting. Django secret key, though, we're going to have to do a bit of work to, oh shit, what was that? We have to do a bit of work. So the way we do this is with the same sort of logic as we did with the test for the directory. We use an if statement, and this is basically saying if this string is empty, then repeat it. So the string we're going to check for is $1. So we've already seen something like this before. If you remember, we used $@ in our supervisor control convenience script, and this is all command line argument parameters. $1 is the first command line argument parameter. So that's when we type in scripts setup server blah. That's this first argument, but it will not be this, which is the second argument. This would be $2, $3, $4, etc. So let's say if the string containing $1 is empty, then we're going to echo and say Django some error. Let's say error no value set for Django secret key argument required. Something like that, whatever you want, whatever sort of fuck you message you want to send to the user. And then you want to exit 1. This means stop the script now, exit the script, and 1 is the exit code. This is a sort of Unix, and I think just general programming convention where you stop the program, and every program that stops has a return code, the return code of 0, meaning everything okay, and a return code that's not 0, such as 1, meaning something fucked up. And all the different codes mean something different on a per program basis. So if you just want to say this failed, you just return a 1. And this is so that other scripts can check the exit code, and that's like what set E is doing, for example. If a program exits with a non-zero exit code, it stops the script. And so we're just leaning into that convention by exiting with an error code of 1 here. We could do 0, that would still work for this script's purpose, but just so that we can run this script with other scripts in the future, we exit with 1. Anyway, else Django secret key equals $1. That's how we solve that problem. So now the user puts Django secret key as an argument by running this like this, and that's our secret key. Yeah, cool. That's that. So take the secret key as first argument. All right, cool, that's done. And now the question arises, okay, so we have these Django secret key and Django settings module. We have these as environment variables, or bash variables that we can use. How do we push these into the sort of system environment folder, which, if you recall, is ets environment? How do we get it in there? So what we're going to do is we're just going to use echo. So we're going to, I guess I'll comment these out so you know that they're not being executed. We're going to write echo from Django settings module. So this string interpolation will be evaluated on our computer, and the string that gets sent to the server will actually be a string literal. It won't be this sort of thing, it'll be this thing. This will get inserted in before the string is sent to the server. So Django settings module, echo that so that it gets pushed to the end of set. If you're like, what the fuck is happening here? Let me show you an example. Let's make a file. Foo.txt. Let's just call it foo. That's cat foo. What's in it? Nothing. Let's echo zzz, and we're going to redirect that output into foo. That's cat foo. Zzz in foo. Let's cat echo into foo. What's inside it? So we overwrote the contents of foo with this string. What if we don't want to overwrite it? We just want to add something to the end. So let's echo b, and we use the append syntax, which is this double sort of, what do you call that? Greater than symbol or whatever you want to call it. Right. Let's use the append syntax, and now we have appended b. Right. So that's all we're going to do here. We're going to append Django settings module to the end of its environment, right? And then we're going to do that again with Django secret key. Now, if you want to get fancy, you can do an extra step. You can stop here. This will be fine. The problem is, every time we run this, it's going to append Django settings module and Django secret key to the end of its environment. I think that's actually okay because it'll just look at the last version set as the version that will get used, and all the previous versions will get overwritten. But it's just like a little shitty that it's we're just going to have, like, if we run the script hundreds of times, we're going to have hundreds of versions of this and this in this file. I kind of just don't like it. So I'm going to show you how to, how I think at least we can prevent this. So if we do if the environment variable on the server, which is, we escape the dollar, let me just push this away so we can see what's happening. So if on the server, Django settings module is not equal to the Django settings module that we are about to write. So if the environment variable on the server, which is set by its set environment, isn't the same as what we want, then we will append it to the end. So it still means that if we change the settings module of the environment or the secret key, it'll append an extra one to its set environment. It just means we're not going to do it as often, only when it changes, which I think is slightly nicer. Otherwise, let's just take a note that we're skipping. And then finish that. And then we can do this same thing with copy, do the same thing with Django secret key. Okay. Oh shit, only once. Cool. Then we can get rid of this. Right, and that is our entire script. It is quite a lot. So let's give it a try. If this works, I will feel really good. If it doesn't work, well, hey, shit happens. Well, that's nice. Our error message is working, and this is why we write error messages like this, even if it's just our code, because we'll just forget shit, and we need to remind ourselves automatically of stuff like this. So let's add a nice secret key for our new server. Maybe avoid that one actually. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, we ran it. It's setting it up. So I'm taking up sources, taking the packages, installing all the stuff. Cool. Let's SSH to root at cattle server. Let's pop print end. Let's pop print end and grep Django. All right, I'm stupid. That's my fault. Let's have a quick look at this. Let's look at the contents of its set environment. So instead of setting the environment variables, I actually just like wrote the values in, which is dumb. So let's clean this up. Bad, Matthew. Okay. One thing to note is when you're... What the fuck? Actually, I'm going to exit and answer no. So do you want to save? Then open it again. Oh, that's weird. Somehow I put the path of the script in the secret key. I guess that's not a huge deal. It would just make our secret key super weird. Just one note about like sort of having these files. You always want a new line in text files in Linux, just because a lot of the tools expect them to be there, and if it's not there, it kind of fucks things up. So it's always nice to have a new line at the end of the file, and if you don't have a new line at the end of the file, you should make sure that they're there. So let's save this with our crappy environment variables removed. Let's try that again, because so the problem was that when I tried to set the environment variable, I didn't actually write the syntax of Django secret key equals Django secret key value. I just set the value. So I need to do this in both cases, where I actually say the name of the variable should be set to the value of the variable. Now I admit this is becoming an eyesore. This isn't so bad, but when we start to get into the nitty-gritty of all this shit, this is terrible to look at. And this is sort of why at some point bash scripting is no longer a great option for doing this kind of stuff. As your deployments become more complicated and you want to, set up servers with more tools and installations and little tweaky configury things, this just gets too weird. And then you need to start looking at other tools which make it simpler. But anyway, let's run our script. Oh, I see. At the end of the secret key, I put the script name. How odd. Cool. Go, go, go. Oh, that was pretty quick. Did it work? SSH in. Let's print our environment variables and grep for Jang. There you go. We're in business. Let's just make sure we didn't mangle our set environment. Looks good to me. Now, if there weren't a new line at the end, this prompt would actually start here. So I'm pretty happy with that. And you might be thinking, okay, we're done. We're set up. That's good. Not so fast. We've actually baked some assumptions into our deployment script that are mostly fixed by this, and I think most of the things we need are there, but we should double check. We should actually make sure that our script can deploy to this new cattle server, or else we've just wasted our time. And I think you'll find that when we try to deploy, it won't work. And so one thing I want to do is just clean up a couple of things here. So I want to set the server environment variable here, like this. And then in backup database, I want to do this. And so I'm just going through these child scripts or subscripts, whatever you want to call them, just making it so the server is only set elsewhere. What was the other one? Set up server. Right, so that's the first thing I want to do. No, that's fine. Upload code and install code. Sorry. Right. And then because we've removed the server environment variable definition, but these all depend on it being present, I want to reuse this bit of code that we put in our setup server where we checked for the presence of an argument and just flipped out if it wasn't there. And we'll modify it a little bit, but we want to use the same general idea. Let's go into upload code, for example, and we'll put it at the start. Actually, let's put it after this so we know what script it is. And so we'll say if there isn't a value set for server, no value set for server, and we won't tell them what to do, but just tell them to go fuck themselves like this, and then we don't need an else. We'll just exit. That's cool. And then we'll take this and put it in all three scripts so that each script knows that it relies on server and it should fail if server isn't present. Yeah. That'll work. Cool. So now we can set server in one place, and we can do things like if we keep track of the fact that we have two different servers. It's a little bit dumb, but it looks fine. Choose server, and we don't need this anymore. We'll just call it cattle server. Let us deploy to our cattle server, and I think you'll find that most of this will work, and then it'll fail. And where it's going to fail is in install code. So this will work because no, it won't. Okay, so here's the thing. This will not work. Backing up. This won't work because it assumes that there's already a SQLite file present in app folder, which we know isn't true because we just set up our server and there's nothing there. This will fail. No, I think this will work fine. And then this will fail because it already assumes that supervisor D is set up. And this sort of leads us to a bit of a problem where it's like, do we write our deployment scripts in such a defensive way that it makes as few assumptions about the server as possible? Or do we write our server script and put some extra stuff in there so it's copying files from here to get it ready? And I think for now, this is most of the way there. This is most of the important stuff. There's a couple of little assumptions that we need to make about the code, which could do manually. Actually, I think we can just work it into here. So the main assumption that we don't want to make is the presence of this script here. So this script assumes that supervisor D is running. It assumes that this script is present in the app directory, and it also assumes that the config file is present. And none of those things are true. So we can't run this script even though we've set up our server. What I think we can do, in fact, I might just indent this so I can collapse it. One thing we can do after doing this is we can actually run our upload code. So we have a value for server set. I might just write export so it gets put into the child script. We can still run scripts, upload code. All right. And then after that's done, we can run another one of these to do that final little bit of setup that we require. So we can get all this crap. And this is really just me being completionist. We could go and do this manually, but just in the spirit of automatically setting up our server, let's get the whole thing done. So we need to upload our code. We need to copy. So this is sort of similar to the install code stuff that we do every time we deploy, but it's sort of with the acknowledgement that our app isn't fully installed. So there are a couple of things we could do. We could just copy paste some of this and modify it. I want to copy as little of it as possible because I just don't like having the same bits of code copied over. But fuck it, maybe we'll do it. So the danger of doing this is if we change how this works, we're going to have to go back and change how this works. And so we're sort of creating a dependency between two sections of code, which isn't ideal, but you know. And so at some point, you've really got to make the decision, like, is it worth all this scripting? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So we're not going to stop Unicorn. We are going to activate our virtual environment. We don't need to do it until we get to here, so it would make more sense to do it here. So what we're going to do, we're going to delete the old files, which I think if we use the force parameter will just always work. And so that's kind of nice because it's idempotent. We are going to copy the new files, which we can assume will work. We're going to go into the app directory, install our Python packages, and then instead of doing all of this crap, we're going to run we're going to start supervisor. Right. So we've created our app folder already. We have deleted any files that might be hanging around in there, which would be weird if they were still there. We are copying our newly deployed files. We're going to install the Python packages that we need. We're going to start supervisor D. And I think, in fact, to actually get this to work, we're basically just going to have to put a whole sort of first-time deployment in here, which is a little bit wonky, but, you know, already sort of bit off more than I can chew here, so I might as well keep chewing. So before we start supervisor D, we really do need to go in, run the Django migrations to create the database, which should work because we're in the virtual environment and it's just our first run. Collect the static files, which should also work. And then when we start supervisor D, it should actually start Unicorn. So I believe this will just do a full deployment. This would be crazy if this worked. We'll use the same secret key. And just to remind you, this is a totally different server now, which is the whole point. We are writing a script so that we can run it on a new server and redeploy our Django code and not worry about, like, how was that server set up? Because we've scripted the whole thing. Okay, so we've uploaded the code, and now we are installing our Python packages in our new virtual environment. I think that actually worked, which is pretty crazy. You can see that it's created a brand new database, which is cool. And we're going to try, actually we have this here. So let's try visit our server, see if it works. Badge request 400. Can you guess why this is happening? Why would we get a bad request 400? I guess I wanted everyone to see this at some point, but it's because we have told Django that it has a whitelist of allowed hosts and this is not on it. So let's add, I guess this will allow us to test our server deployment anyway. So we've got our deploy script. It's running cattle server instead of tut server now. The only thing we need to change is in tut, under tut settings prod, we need to add a new IP address. So that is something you need to remember to do. If you add new hosts, they need to be in allowed hosts. This can be an environment variable as well, by the way. Yeah. Cool. Right, well, let's test out the other deployment script that was set up server with the secret key. Let's now try just a regular old deployment to our new server, which is cattle server. And what we're hoping it will do, it'll copy our new settings over with our new prod py, which has our allowed hosts in there. Whew, I know this has been a long video, but hopefully it's been worth it just for the experience of scripting everything. Like, there is nothing left to script as far as I can tell. And if you want to do less scripting, that's fine. But if you want to script all of the things, you have seen sort of how to do it. Okay, so it's copying all the crap. And I really should add something to get rid of those PYC files because they're pretty useless. If find works in git bash, then we could run find from git bash. I'm not sure if it's present or not. But this appears to be working, which is just a Christmas miracle. I mean, you should never expect stuff to work first time like this, but it is working. And you can see, compared to our other server, what was it, 64 or whatever, this has a count of 87, and this has a count of 2 because they're completely separate databases. And I actually think the one thing I fucked up is that we just ran a database backup. Oh, that's interesting. Didn't it back up my database? Five, 4, 5, 8. What happened to my other backup? Okay, that's worth looking into because you don't want just one database backup, you want a bunch of them. Because I thought we already had something in there. Anyway, that's a question for another time. What is going wrong with our database backups? But there you go. We have scripted a deployment to a brand new server. We have written a long-ass bash script that completely automates the, what have we got here? It's pretty monstrous, but we've updated our app sources, installed all of our stuff, installed virtualenv, set up our app folder, created our virtual environment, set our system environment variables, uploaded the code, and done our initial deployment, and then done a subsequent deployment, which is pretty cool. And it integrates fine with our deploy script. So that said, these are cattle, not sheep. We don't care about these servers anymore because as long as we have the database backed up, we can do this without giving a shit. So, of course, DigitalOcean still cares, so they make you, yes, I do want to destroy this droplet. And that's it. That is how you script your server setup. Enjoy.